Hey everybody, DJ here, and this is going to be the glass tutorial for the RPR 3.0 or ProRender 3.0 engine. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out, and we also have a Discord server and a Patreon, which are linked below in the video description. And let's go ahead and jump into Blender here. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use what we used in the last tutorial. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and take a look at the last tutorial I did on the basic materials, and you'll see how I kind of set up this scene here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just take this and we're going to link the materials to a glass material and just see how things work. Now, just FYI, there is a little keyboard and a mouse down at the bottom left so you can see what I'm doing. But also, this isn't really going to use a lot of shortcuts and stuff like that, so you really shouldn't worry too much about that. But we're going to be looking at the full, which is the 2.0 renderer, but we're also going to be looking at legacy because there's a couple things like volumes that aren't supported yet. So later on in this video, we're going to be looking at that. We're also going to be looking at caustics and a couple other things like that. So let's go ahead and start. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to select my objects. So I'm going to select all of these here. I'm going to go over here and click New. And we're not going to use the principled BSDF for this because if we go over here and we add with Shift A the shader for RPR Uber, basically this is going to be a much better way of actually creating the glass. And there's a lot of really great things in here. So let's go ahead and put the shader right here into the surface. And if we go to rendered, actually we're going to link the material here. So I'm going to hit Control L, link materials. And we basically have just this white material. Now, if you remember from the last tutorial that we did, or the last video, all of these little buttons here are going to do something different. So for a glass to work, what we need to do is we need to take away this diffuse. So go ahead and turn that off. And we want reflection, but not just a regular reflection. This is a metalness reflection. What we want is an index of refraction. So let's turn that on. And you'll see that that shows up with the IOR right here. So 1.5 is going to do just fine. You can play with these. And if you do want to set these to something else, do a Google search and you'll find that whatever it is that you want, whether it's water or crystal or plastics or glass, someone will have a reflection IOR available to you. So you can go ahead and look that up and put that in there by clicking on it and typing in the number, or you can just slide it around. It's really up to you. And we're going to take the reflection roughness. I'm just going to pull this down a little bit. And to make this a proper glass, we have to add the refraction to it. So we're going to click that on. And you can see now we have a very basic, simple glass shader. And what's really great about the 2.0, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I'm going to go File, Save. I already saved it as the glass tutorial here. What's really great about glass in the ProRender is how clean it renders immediately. So all I have is a HDRI for the background here and a simple primitive light that kind of gets imported. So if I turn back on the overlays, you can see it's just right there. It's a little point light. But you can see that there's really not a whole lot of grain that's going on here. So the 2.0 render is actually really fast at rendering this out if you're using primitives and stuff like that. So I really do recommend that, for glass or water effects or something like that, if you're going to send something to a client and you need something that renders out really fast and doesn't necessarily refract so many points and doesn't have as many branching light paths and stuff like that, this is actually a very good way to do that. And what's really neat is that there are these different modes here. So there's low. So if I turn that on and we look at it in the rendered view, it kind of uses like a gaming engine. So you can see it's like really kind of like transparent and all that, and it's using the GPU to render this out. So it's not really that great, but it's really nice for visualizing what's going on in your scene and really quickly updating the viewport. And if we switch that over to medium and wait for it to load, you can see that if we actually look through it, unlike Eevee, you can actually see through refractive objects. Okay? And if we set this to high, you have a little bit of that ray trace. You can actually see the little points of the ray tracing light that's going through there. And it very quickly will render this scene out. And if you wanted to, you can actually take this, and I'm just going to show you really quickly. You don't have to follow along with this or anything. But I'm going to add a UV sphere here. and I'm going to shade it smooth, and I'm just going to put it right inside of this monkey head. Okay. And I'm going to link the materials so that they both have a glass effect. And if we look through here, and so this is a little bit of a bug. Sometimes when you go directly to high, that happens. So if you go back to low and then you go to high, it'll solve that issue. But you can see that that refractive sphere is actually in there. And if we go to medium, you can see that refractive sphere is still in there. So if you want something really, really quick and you can't use Eevee because it doesn't really handle refractions really well and you don't want to use specialized shaders or anything, this is a very, very nice way to render out your scene for a client or for pre-visualizations or something like that, because you can see through those refractive objects and you don't have to do anything really special. It's a really, really great, and I think one of the best things about this engine is how you can have multiple refractive objects nested within each other and look through those, and it still renders as if that refraction is there. It's a really great part of this particular engine. So let's go back to the full mode now. And we're going to go ahead and save before we do anything else. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that sphere. It is really cool that it's in there, but we're going to go ahead and delete it. And let's update the viewport here. And we're going to just play with a couple of the render properties here. And if we take a look at this and you kind of look closely, if you look closely at this, you can see that there's a kind of a bunch of stuff like we saw in the last one, which is why I recommend kind of like watching the last one before you go in here. But it basically you're seeing new stuff inside the refraction. You have all these other new checkboxes here. So I'm going to go over those in a second. I'm just going to show you some of the other sliders here. So reflection roughness is obvious. It's the same thing like before. The roughness and well, just the roughness for both refraction and reflection basically do the same thing. It's going to make your object more and more rough or more and more smooth as you want it to be. It's really up to you. But we're going to keep the roughness off right now, and what we're going to do is play with a couple of these colors here. So let's first take a look at the reflection color, and it does pretty much what you would expect. It basically will color the reflecting image. Okay, so the reflecting color. It's not the actual color of the glass, it's just whatever the reflection is off of the glass, that is coloring that. Okay. And then the refraction color, that's the actual color of the glass. So if I change this to an orange or something, you can see we get a really cool effect where we have a sort of like a orangish glass color, and then the reflection is this really cool bluish green color. And that's going to change depending on the roughness you have in here. So if I put this to a 0.5, you can see that the reflection is more kind of like smoothed out. And if you look at the refraction, it's a little bit more, or I mean by smoothed out, I mean like it's not as sharp as far as the reflections are concerned. And then if you look at the refracted area, you can see right here it's a lot more clear. But if we take the refraction roughness and we pop that up to a 0.3 or something, you can see that now the refraction and the reflection are both having a roughness to it, and it makes this a different effect. You can pipe black and white images into here. I'm not really going to go into that. That's going to be covered in the PBR materials tutorial, but you can basically see that there is a really nice effect that we're already getting by just moving a couple of these sliders and a couple of these colors here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the refraction roughness. I'm going to put that down to a, actually we're just going to take this off, and then reflection roughness, we're going to put it at 0.05. Technically nothing is 100% smooth. So I guess we'll put this at a 0.05 or something like that. So that's kind of the effect we'll get here. Just want to take a moment to mention, because I did mention it when I actually recorded this, the area right here for the IOR for the refraction, that is going to be where you want to, it kind of depends on what you're doing, but often you might want to have the reflection IOR and the refraction IOR be the same. But really, depending on the type of glass object or refraction object you have, whether it's a crystal or if it's a, diamond or something like that, or just regular glass, you might want to go ahead and look up those values and put that IOR right in here. And that's going to give you the more realistic refraction that you would expect to see in that particular material. So now let's take a moment and take a look at these little checkboxes here. So let's first look at the refraction thin surface. So if we turn that on and we take a look at that, basically what you get here, I'm going to turn off the overlays, you get sort of like a bubble effect. So if you're rendering bubbles or a very thin film or a plastic or something that you need to see through, like if you're doing some kind of, I don't know, maybe a medical sort of rendering where you have to see inside of something, you might want to use this. And you get this really neat effect where you can kind of just see through just the surface of it. And it's really, really nice. Let's take a look at the plane here and see how this is looking. So you can see here you have the orange color here and then more of a blue reflective color here. And if we take that off, you can see that effect here. So you have this orange sort of effect right in here, and you get that more bluish color right on the edge here. And like I always say with testing out your materials, it's good to look at a couple different objects with different properties just to see how the actual mesh and geometry affect those materials so you can actually get what you want. The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at caustics. And caustics, I like to keep it very, very simple because a lot of people get really confused by this and there's a lot going on, and I'm just going to talk about the basics. So basically, caustics are when a light source will hit an object and then it sort of like the light bounces around and gets refracted and pushed through that object, and it represents itself in a lot of different ways. And if you'd like to, you can take a look at my video that I did that is specifically on caustics in ProRender and LuxCore and cycles and all that. But in this one, I'm going to cover it a little bit more thoroughly for this engine. So if we take a look at this monkey head here, or Suzanne as it's always called, you can see that there is a sort of like shadow being cast over here. And if we turn on allow caustics, that color has changed. Okay. And kind of the way that the object is being rendered has changed. So if we take a look at it, observe this shadow over here, and we check that off, you can see that that color changes. Okay. And really quick, what we're going to do is let's save, because sometimes when you move stuff around right now, there's the viewport might crash sometimes. So let's actually turn this to solid mode, and I'm going to take the light right here. I'm going to move it over near the monkey head right there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change it to an area light, and I'm going to change the size here to a, let's try 0.25. How about a 1? I think a 1 will be just fine. And then I'm going to go here to the object constraints, and I'm going to add a track to, and then use the little pipette here and select Suzanne. So now no matter where I move this light, you can see it's tracking to that monkey head, okay? And we're just going to take a look and see how the primitive light of this area changes the way that the caustics are being rendered. So over here in the viewport on the left, we're going to zoom in on this, and we're going to look at the rendered view. Let's split this panel, and then on the bottom panel here, we're going to put in the shader editor. And up here, we're just going to leave this as it is. So you can see there's that kind of nice little orangey look there, but it's not actual true caustics, okay? So let's go ahead and turn on allow caustics. And you can see that now it's a very dark shadow. And a lot of people get very disappointed by this because true glass and how caustics work in the real life, it actually uses bidirectional approach when calculating caustics. So really in real life, there's not just the rays being cast to the camera, which right now the viewer, how we're kind of moving around here, we are technically the camera, and it's calculating the paths directly towards that object. Now, to add, bidirectional or branched pathing or anything like that, sometimes you have to have a completely different engine. And for this particular engine, the way that primitive lights like this plane right here work, and just the way that light rays are calculated, it doesn't really easily allow for that. And if you need more super realistic caustics and all of that, I would suggest again taking a look at the tutorial that I did on understanding caustics in general and the different engines, but there are some ways that we can actually make this look better. And one of the main things here is that the location of your light source, so if I pull this closer, the location of the light source actually has an effect on the way that the caustics are being calculated. So the closer it is, usually the more of that color you're going to see being cast through the object. But it's not just that, it's also the size of your lamp. So the size here, and the actual intensity of the lamp. So if we change this, let's say to a 5000, there could be differences. So this all depends on the type of lamp that you're using. If you're using these types of primitives, it's the size and it's the power. And again, I cover this more clearly in the caustics tutorial. But no matter what you do with these primitives, you'll notice that really you're not getting the color of the glass cast through onto the shadow here. And one way that you can get around that is you can actually, and I'm just going to back this off and put it over here. We're going to add, so I'm going to put the 3D cursor right over here. I'm going to add a plane. And what we're going to do is something that I usually recommend people not necessarily do because it adds to your render time and it really does make things a lot more noisy, but this is a more accurate way to represent caustics and lighting of glass inside of this engine. And what you do is you create a plane. We're going to do the exact same thing that we did with the primitive here. We're going to take the plane, we're going to add an object constraint, track 2, and we're going to select the monkey head. And let's scale this down a little bit to make it a little bit closer. I'm going to apply the scale with Control A. And then we're going to turn off the other lamp here. So the light here, we're just going to turn that off. And then this plane, we're going to go to the Materials tab. We're going to add New. And instead of the principled BSDF, let's go ahead and delete that. And we're just going to add a RPR Uber, turn everything off except emission. So we're going to basically set an emission for this object. And we're going to take that and pipe that into the surface. So let's save really quick before we do this and go to the rendered view. And right away, you're not quite seeing anything, but if you look right there, you can actually see a little bit of that color. And if we take the intensity and we turn it up to a 50 or something like that, you can see that now you are getting more realistic caustic effect through the glass, but you have all this other noise here, okay? So if I take the emission intensity, turn it up to 150 or something like that, you can see that it's a lot more obvious what's going on here. You're seeing that colored glass or the light being colored by the glass shoot right through there, and you get a little bit more of a realistic expected caustics look that's being refracted through that glass. So what I'm going to do here, and I don't recommend you necessarily do this, I'm going to go ahead and change the sampling. So the viewport sampling over here on the right, I'm going to change this actually from a max of 32 to 128. So you can see how this is going to look a little bit clearer and it's a little bit more obvious what's happening here. So taking a look right there, you can see that there's a lot more of that expected, realistic, refracted color of the light shooting through the object. But there's also a lot more noise, okay? So just keep that in mind when you're doing this. Obviously, like I say all the time with anything, you have to kind of know what you're doing before you start so that when you make decisions like this, you're aware that you're going to have a lot more noise. So you'll need more samples in the end and all that. But if this is what you need is more realistic looking glass, this is the approach that you would want to do. And you can make it a sphere, you can make it, whatever sort of 3D geometric object you want and throw uh, that emission shader on there and you'll get relatively this kind of look because you're using an object to emit the light instead of a primitive like the primitive lights that are built in. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to save our file. And the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn off this emission plane and turn back on this light. And we're just going to make it a regular point light for now, just so that things are rendered a little bit quicker. So let's actually select the light and put it back to a point and change it to a 0.25. Take a look at this. And there we have it. So obviously a lot faster, a lot cleaner with the primitive, like I said, but you have to kind of figure out what you're doing first before you start adding those other emission planes and stuff. So let's take a look at some of this other stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and move this up, and we're going to take a look at what I think is one of the most amazing things about ProRender is the ease of this glass, especially with doing refraction absorption colors. Okay. Now, the main thing here that you need to understand is 2.0 renderer, which is the current full, that is still under development, and there's some things that are not supported, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I change the reflection color here to a white, and let's change the refraction color to a white, so now we just have a regular clear glass here. If I take the refraction absorption color and I change this to a red, let's just, add that there. Nothing happens, and that's just fine because often you have to actually add the absorption distance. And the lower the number, the quicker it's going to turn into this color as you look through the three-dimensional object. So if I set this to a 0.2 or something like that, I should see red glass with a absorption that's happening for however thick that glass is with the volume it's creating. And if you look around, you'll see that there's nothing happening. Okay. And that's because right now volumes are not supported inside of 2.0, the 2.0 renderer. So what we need to do is we need to actually go to the legacy. So let's go ahead and save, change this from full to the legacy version. Okay. So if we load that up and then go into the rendered view, which uses a different system to sort of like create this render. We'll wait for it, and there we go. So now you can see overall everything is a bit different. The ground and the overall way that things are being rendered isn't quite the same. You see a lot more grain. It might feel like the viewport is a little bit more responsive. All those sorts of things. It's just a different way that the renderer was built. But you can see that now we have a glass that is a really, really dark red. And if I take the refraction absorption distance here and I take that to a 1, let's actually change it to a 3, you can see that based on the geometry, it's changing the color of the glass. So that's pretty cool. And you can make some really amazing looking glass by using this technique. For example, and this is the example I always use, if you have an acrylic glass or certain types of colored glass, they're usually green at the side. So if you change this to a green, you can see that if you go to the side of this plane right here, it's a clear glass, and then as you swoop around to the side, it becomes green because the volume is changing to a green. And depending on that distance, if you set this to a 10, for example, you can see that it's a lot less obvious and it's less quick to turn into that color based on the volume of the glass and the angle that you're looking at it. So that's really awesome. And you can get some really neat effects. Um, and overall you can get some really amazing looking stuff, especially if you're making glass sculpture concepts or anything like that. You can get some really cool effects. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to change this to like a 5, so it's a little bit more obvious. We're going to change the refraction color to something like a blue. Let's try a green, and let's actually take the refraction absorption and make it a 1. Let's try something like that. Maybe take this down a little bit. There we go. And then take the reflection color and make that a different color, like a purple. And you can see that now we have a mixture of a whole bunch of different colors going on. You have a purple reflection that's coming off of the glass. You have this absorption of the red, and we can go ahead and change that to a yellow or something, and you can see how much that changes it. And it's really fun to play with these and get some really neat effects. So you can see there I have a sort of like a turquoise color for the volume. And then you also have the refraction color, which is the actual color of the glass, where you can make it clear, or you can color the overall sort of glass here and change how everything is being affected just by changing the overall color of the glass. So really, really fun stuff. It's going to be really awesome when the 2.0 gets this, because you'll basically get the same effect, just rendered a lot quicker. And you can also see how the primitive here, see the primitive with the legacy build, the caustics are a little bit more clear of what you would expect to see from the uh, from real glass caustics. So the 2.0 render and the legacy have a little bit of a different way of representing this stuff. So sometimes I will tell people, use legacy if you're trying to do volumes and if this is the kind of thing that you want and you need a more responsive viewport or something. But really, 2.0, the new full view or render engine is really the next level as far as getting clarity and speed in your renders and how they have built it. So I'm really looking forward to the future of how they are going to implement the volumes and stuff. So just, keep an eye out for newer tutorials and videos about that once it comes out, because I'm sure that there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve and it might have a little bit of a difference on how it works. But overall, this should get you roughly where you need to be as far as glass is concerned. And that's going to be it for this tutorial. So if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials.